Hey everyone, welcome to another daily cinephile vlog. As you can see from the shirt, I'm about to see a movie, but can you guess which movie I'm seeing? Can you figure it out? I'm too freaked out. I don't think he really likes the proton pack. He doesn't mind the shirt. He's worn the shirt before with no problem, but it's the proton pack he's not a fan of. The Marcus Duluth Cinema. And there's the newest Ghostbusters poster. Alright, so not the Ecto one, but the Ecto 1J. Very cool to see. The local Twin Ports Ghostbusters. They're all here. Incredible proton pack on the back. There's some crazy stuff going on.
You like the red parka?
Wait, does it actually work though?
It does.
Wait, yeah.
I have to be switched on though.
This is new clothing, by the way. This is like from the new movie. Mm-hmm. So this is like is this like official, or did you just find it yourself?
This is official. It's screen accurate. Yeah. It
okay.
Like came from. There's a site that makes only like screen accurate jackets.
Right.
Like this just came in for now. So. And
then world premiere. How was it?
Greatest day ever. It was the greatest day that ever happened. Like seeing everybody and just, it was overwhelming. And the movie was good, was the other thing. And like seeing it with all the celebrities and like, yeah, it may never happen again. It was the greatest day ever.
Did you meet anybody?
I met Ernie Hudson. Well, I've seen him previously. McKenna Grace, Logan Kim. All four of the Impractical Jokers.
Okay.
And then the director himself, Gil Keenan.
Okay.
Those are the people I got to mingle with and swap patches with and stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was like, it was great. And then going to the firehouse, I went there twice. And then, and then I did other New York sightseeing. I went to the Statue of Liberty. I got up to the Crown and recreated the scene from Ghostbusters 2.
Yeah.
And
did you remember to bring your NES Advantage controller?
They wouldn't let me bring it up. They wouldn't let me bring the PKE up. They were like, no.
No.
Yeah, no. So I had to go up just as is.
Yeah. Getting our Proton Pack Punch, which those ingredients seem pretty familiar. It's almost like that's just a Spider-Man drink. Pretty sure. I feel like this is the Oscars or something. This is officially licensed Ghostbusters Frozen Empire cotton candy, I think.
People having their espresso. We're just gonna get a quick photo of you if you want to look at the camera right here. Like wave your arms.
What if I told you imaginary friends are real?
Hi.
Oh God. And when their kids grow up, they need to find new ones.
Now that I've seen the movie, let's talk about it. But before we get there, I should probably mention my thoughts on the previous Ghostbusters movies. I don't think I've really talked about them before in other videos. So I'll start out by saying the original Ghostbusters is a comedy classic. I love the humor, I love the spookiness, love the characters, love that tight screenplay. What hasn't been said about Ghostbusters yet? It's up there as one of my favorite movies of all time. It's a movie I grew up with. Ghostbusters 2 was a movie that, as a kid, it was the first time I remember being disappointed in a movie. It didn't have the same kind of tone or appeal that the first movie had. I didn't watch it for many years, but after returning to it, I actually think it's okay. It works decent enough. There's a lot of cool ideas in it. I like the idea of slime running through New York and running off of negative energy. There's a scene in that movie where they're down in a subway and there's all these spikes on heads. They appear out of nowhere and they freak out the Ghostbusters, and that's a scene that's always stuck with me. There's also the Statue of Liberty. I love that ending scene. It's really ridiculous, but I mean, it's a Ghostbusters movie. I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility within the Ghostbusters universe. It's a lot of fun. So it's not a perfect sequel. I really don't think it's the best follow-up to the original because it's really not as funny as the original, which I think is the biggest part of what makes that original movie great. It's like the meshing of comedy and horror, but still, it's a decent enough sequel. I mean, I think it's gotten better with age. And then you had the 2016 movie. I haven't watched that one in a few years, but I remember thinking it was funny enough. Not as funny as the original Ghostbusters, but still, it was, it was a decent comedy movie. I think the biggest problem with that was it felt pretty obvious that they were cutting in a lot of references to the original movie after the fact. It's as if there was like a test screening and it didn't do too well, so then they had to add in a bunch of Ghostbusters references like Stay Puft and Slimer, and just all the original cast was in there as well, but not as their original characters. And again, it has to reestablish the Ghostbusters, which is actually a common issue with all of these Ghostbusters follow-ups. I mean, even Ghostbusters 2, there's like a backlash to the Ghostbusters. Bill Murray's no longer a Ghostbuster, so they have to like reestablish themselves. And then the 2016 movie, since it's a remake, they have to do the same thing. But overall, as a Paul Feig movie, I actually do enjoy it. It's not as funny as his other work, and it's not as funny as the original Ghostbusters, but I thought it was good enough. I mean, there was different character dynamics. I actually like the villain, even though it's a really silly villain. I actually think the villain in that movie is one of the more memorable parts about it. But it was a movie that I just don't think it ever really had a chance, because doing a remake nowadays is just a bad idea. I think it would have been better had they just had that cast as new Ghostbusters in a world where Ghostbusters already exists. But anyway, that movie didn't do well enough at the box office, and then came Ghostbusters Afterlife, which was kind of a surprise. You had Jason Reitman, the son of Ivan Reitman, in the director's chair, and it was a different type of Ghostbusters movie. They took the setting out of New York, which I love. So you just have Ghostbusters in Oklahoma. And I liked the screenplay. I liked the dialogue. It felt like a Jason Reitman movie, but it also felt like a bigger budget version of one of his movies. The effects are great in it. It matches tonally with the original too. And there's also that emotional core to it, which is sort of new for Ghostbusters, but I thought it worked really well. There's a few tiresome throwbacks, and I think by the third act, it starts to retread the plot of the first movie way too much, but I still think it's incredibly enjoyable and lovely to look at. I've returned to that movie, and I don't think it's as good as it was when I saw it in theaters, but still really like that movie. I didn't know how that movie was going to do or how they were going to judge its performance, given that it was coming out right as the pandemic was mellowing out. So it made a decent enough money, but I didn't know if it was going to be enough to make a sequel. But here we are. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. The first trailer got me really excited because, you see New York during the summer, it's freezing over, and I like that concept. It reminded me of Ghostbusters 2, where there was a concept to that film, where slime was overtaking New York. Now it's like, oh, New York's gonna freeze during the summer, and now you're gonna see Ghostbusters in like winter coats and such, and it's like, oh, just a different vibe. And then they had the second trailer, and that one didn't get me as excited. There seemed to be way too many references to the original film, and it just felt weird because I was like, I thought we already did that with Afterlife. Why are we doing so many references to the first movie? Watching the movie, the first hour is pretty solid. It's the type of Ghostbusters movie I yearned for as a child. It's back in New York, which, I like the change of setting in Afterlife, but at the same time, I'm glad to be back in New York. Overall, it seems like movies have been avoiding New York in recent years. It seems like we went through like a decade or two of every single world-ending event for every franchise movie. It had to take place in New York, and now filmmakers have overcorrected, kept avoiding New York and Manhattan in general, and now it seems like no movies are in New York. So it's kind of nice to see, like, hey, they're busting ghosts down the streets of Manhattan. That's a lot of fun. And for the first time, they don't need to re-establish the Ghostbusters. They're not in retirement. There's not a backlash to them. They're operating from the first scene. They are, well, not the first scene technically. The first scene is actually a great flashback scene that goes back to, like, I think it's 1904. That's actually a really well done scene. But anyway, the actual opening scene where they're fighting the ghosts, it right away from the start, they are just ghost busting. It's exactly what we've always wanted out of a sequel. It kind of goes against the logic of Afterlife because in that movie, it didn't seem like ghosts were prominent anymore. They didn't really exist, so there wasn't really a need for Ghostbusters. And I guess Afterlife kind of opened that door. I suppose when Gozer came back, it opened up that portal and let all the ghosts out, maybe, and they all went to New York. I don't know. But who cares? I'm not going to question that. I'm not going to question an inconsistency to Afterlife. It's like, no, we don't need to waste time showing that ghosts are back. Oh, maybe we should fight them in New York. It's like, no, they're fighting them in New York. That's exactly what we want. We don't need to reestablish them. Let's just get into it. There's a lot of returning characters, but there's also new characters, and for the most part, it makes sense. The family now lives in the firehouse. The firehouse was purchased by Winston because apparently he's a multimillionaire now. I don't know, but I'm running with it. How do some of the non-family friends make it from Oklahoma to New York? Well, it's the summer, and Podcast is just lying to his parents. He's saying that he's at space camp, and instead he's living with Ray at the occult store, and they're running a show on YouTube where Ray looks into possessed objects, and that's a great idea. I mean, it would make sense that Ray would have a YouTube show in modern times. And Lucky is back as an intern for the Ghostbusters tech team. It's a bit wonky how everybody manages to make it to New York, but it works. And also, it's pretty funny. There's a few really solid lines from Paul Rudd and Bill Murray, and the newcomer Kumail Nanjiani, which he probably is the comedic standout of this one. As for the original Ghostbusters, everyone's back, except Rick Moranis again. But Bill Murray's even back, as I said before. He's given the least amount of screen time, but it's nice to see him show up. If anything, this is Dan Aykroyd's time to shine. He's given that weird, strange dialogue, just going on technobabble, and you can tell that this is the Ghostbusters movie that he's wanted to be in since 1984. He is having the most fun on screen. They also managed to give him a little character arc with him and Winston getting older and reaching their retirement years, but they don't really want to give up on the Ghostbusters because, hey, I'm retiring and this is the thing I love to do. Why can't I do this in my golden years? It's a nice little tidbit in a movie with a lot of nice little character arc tidbits. Not every character is given something to do, though. Like, for the most part, Carrie Coon and Finn Wolfhard's characters, they really don't do much in this one. Paul Rudd has a little bit of an arc, since he's taking on the father role in the family. Once again, this is Phoebe's movie. She's being pushed away from the Ghostbusters because she's underage. She can't operate as a Ghostbuster when she's under 18. She's not an adult, and she doesn't really know what to do with that. In the meantime, she actually befriends a ghost, and they have chemistry that they share through their awkward mannerisms. It also puts the question out there about the ethics of trapping ghosts, an idea that I didn't expect from these sequels. It doesn't go too far with it, but still, it's neat to see it brought up, but it's cool to see like a ghost with, you know, a human personality and purpose. Unfortunately, things start to get messy in the second and third act. The dialogue gets riddled with exposition over a pretty easy to solve mystery. Afterlife was such a different Ghostbusters movie. It had a much more relaxed approach, and it didn't try to overcomplicate things, unlike Frozen Empire. The multiple characters that have nothing to do only starts to become more and more apparent. And then you got the original cast, and then the Afterlife cast, but also a bunch of new characters. Kumail Nanjiani, Patton Oswalt, the engineering guy. There's the ghost named Melody. At one point, the characters split up, but that only makes the plot more muddled. They go to the library, and it's like there's information they receive from Patton Oswalt, and it's conveyed in an animated and very cool way, but like this is information that I feel like could have been figured out in a different way. I don't think we needed to go to the library and meet a completely different character to figure this out, but I guess that would mean we wouldn't go to the library from the original movie, or see that ghost from the original movie, or even the librarian from the original movie. You see the common thread with this one? There's so many Easter eggs. And again, I have to ask, I thought that was done in Afterlife. I didn't think we really needed to do it all again with this one, and even more so. At least the lion statue gets possessed by a ghost. I mean, I remember the original movie, it opens with that shot of the lion in front of the library. It's a very spooky way to introduce the movie, especially with the music. And as a kid, I always thought, does that lion play into it? Is that lion going to become evil or something? And it's cool that this movie actually made that idea a reality. The whole library scene showcases a major issue with this film. For every neat idea, there's several tiresome ones coming right behind it. The villain, I'll be blunt, they suck. It's another deep-voiced horned monster. It's a very boring design, unfortunately. It doesn't do anything interesting, and it doesn't have all that interesting of a history, and it doesn't really show up until the last few minutes. Even then, the entire concept of New York freezing over during the summer, that doesn't show up until the last half hour. And the consequences have never felt lower. You don't really see the effect that this frozen summer has on New York. You see it for a few seconds and then they move on. And even the villain is defeated in a very basic way. You have all these Ghostbusters, past and present, all holding a proton pack, shooting it at the villain, and for what? It's a really cool group shot, but then they get pushed aside anyway, and it's like really easy to defeat them. And it's like, the idea of that is really cool, but the way they go about it is so boring. The villain's plan is dumb, and it relies on a different character doing something incredibly stupid. I don't really want to spoil it, but it feels almost out of character for what this character does. There's a line drop earlier in the movie that is so confusingly placed, it doesn't really make any sense for this character to ask what they end up asking, but it's obviously meant to foreshadow something that happens later. And then when it happens, when you see the payoff, it is so ridiculous. Even for a Ghostbusters movie, it's really ridiculous. There's just no setup for how that payoff even happens. Meanwhile, the villain has a pawn in its scheme. You don't see much of an interaction between the pawn and the villain, and you don't really know what the pawn is getting out of the situation. Like, by helping the villain, what exactly is it hoping to achieve? There's an idea there, but it doesn't really add up. There's also a lot of failed tension. Like, at one point at the laboratory, one of the characters gets frozen by the villain. It seems anyway. But then the next scene, they're back, and it's like nothing even happened. And I was like, did you get frozen? Did someone save you? I don't really get what's going on here. Like, I thought this villain froze characters and they like break into ice pieces. You have the mayor, played by Dickless from the first movie, and I'm not even going to try to figure out how he became mayor since the first movie, but sure, he's the mayor, and he takes away the Ghostbusters firehouse again. He takes away the proton packs, and this is right before the climax. Again, just like the first movie. Except, they don't find a creative way to save the day and get their, equipment back or create new equipment. No, they just break into the firehouse, just a lock on the door, there's no problem getting in. And then don't worry, the Ghostbusters tech team actually made new proton packs, so they just wheel them in and there's literally no problem. So really, you didn't even need the mayor character in the movie because all that stuff doesn't really play into what happens in the climax. It's one of those movies where, every problem is just immediately resolved. And there's, a lot of things I could question. For instance, there's this Ghostbusters laboratory, but the characters seemingly have no idea it even exists, which is weird because I thought the whole company was Ghostbusters. Why is there a lab in a separate place? And why hasn't Winston told the Afterlife cast about this engineering facility? And at the same time, Lucky is now interning there, but Trevor, didn't know this. Oh, why didn't you tell me you were interning with the Ghostbusters? And it's yeah, why didn't you tell him that when he's literally a Ghostbuster? It makes no sense, but all of that's nitpicking. Overall, it's messy writing with convoluted storylines and way too many characters. Worst of all, unlike the beginning of the movie, there's not a lot of ghost busting in this, and there's not much for new ghost designs. You see Paul Rudd and the gang drive away to go fight ghosts later in the movie, but since Phoebe needs to stay back, we actually stay with Phoebe. We don't see who they're all going to go fight, and I'm like, oh great, so we're missing out on the ghost busting. I was really hoping we'd see more creativity after Afterlife, but instead they get stuck going back to the iconography of the original movie while setting up a boring villain and a boring climax. Granted, the effects look really good. Slimer looks so good that I'm actually wondering if that was a practical effect. I didn't look it up, but he looks incredible in this movie. Even though there's only 3 or 4 new ghosts, their design is unique. I especially like the Possessor. I'm glad to see more Ghostbusters on the big screen, and I think fans will enjoy this one. I think it's technically closer to something like Ghostbusters 1 and 2 than Afterlife, and I hope it does well enough at the box office to warrant a sequel. But in the future, I don't think we need to keep bringing back the original cast. At least not the entirety of the cast. And anybody from the Afterlife cast or the new cast members from this movie, I don't think you need to bring everybody, especially the ones who aren't providing anything to the story. Trim the script down and the characters down, make a better villain, and you would have a decent franchise movie. This gave me a taste of what I want out of Ghostbusters, especially in the future. So as a fan, I have hope for the future installments. But for this movie, as is, I can only give it 2.5 out of 5.